I can't tell you when I have been this excited about a guest. This is someone that I so admire. I so want you to meet, and I want you to get her book. But gosh, you got to hear her story because she's a journalist, and she's also, like me, a cop's wife. And those two worlds came crashing down one day, and she's going to tell us all about that. Liz Collin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Betsy. I appreciate it. Been a big fan of your work for a long time. Thanks for fighting for the good guys.
Thank you so much. And, you know, we have such a special love, my husband and I, for the police officers of Minnesota, especially Minneapolis. And so let's talk about that. You are, you know, have been a journalist for over 20 years, and you were a mainstream investigative journalist, right? Tell people about your career.
Yeah, so just a little background. I'm a Worthington, Minnesota native, kind of grew up in a smaller town in the southwest corner of the state, and grew up watching the CBS station, which was WCCO television, and always dreamed of being an anchor and a reporter, honestly, from the time I was a little kid. So the way the business works, you kind of move up the ranks, and I spent time in South Dakota, Kansas, Pennsylvania, and finally landed my dream job at WCCO television in 2008, where I was the weekend anchor, kind of the primary fill-in anchor, and was an investigative reporter there for 12 years when this incident happened, when you talk about these two worlds colliding, and they sure did back in 2020.
So how'd you end up marrying a cop?
That's a whole other show. But yeah, so I knew kind of Bob, just being in the position that I was in as a reporter, but I did reporting on police. So I didn't think it was perhaps a good idea when he called for a date, but then eventually went into my boss before I even agreed to go on a date with him, just to say that, hey, I think I'm going to go on this date with this guy, the lieutenant, who's the president of the Minneapolis Police Federation at the time. And I, kind of recused myself from Minneapolis PD stories at the time due to his position, which made sense. And we'd been married for a couple of years at this time, really with no complaint. I always was fond of law enforcement as far as respected their position. And even before I met Bob, I did a Citizens Academy, and I did a lot of reporting on police because I always felt that the media never treated these situations fairly. And I sort of knew how the media manipulation had been working behind the scenes for a while, but I'd never seen anything like it on this scale when it came to the George Floyd incident.
So fast forward to May of 2020, the infamous death of George Floyd, which, changed life for Minneapolis PD, for the citizens of Minneapolis, but really for law enforcement nationwide here in the United States, and frankly, beyond. And so talk about your involvement in that, and what you and your husband went through.
So this was coming off of the Memorial Day weekend. Bob gets a call, like he did a lot as union president, and we're kind of unpacking, putting things away, getting ready for the week. And it's Officer Thomas Lane at the time who talks about this person they had in custody. They were called to respond to this person passing a counterfeit bill. Something happens to him medically. They don't know much at that time, just kind of giving Bob a heads up. Then he calls back a short time later and says, that unfortunately George Floyd, we'd eventually learn his name, passed away at the hospital. And Bob went in, as he did for any in custody death, but circumstances changed quickly. It was middle of the night, essentially, when the chief asked Bob to come back in to where they were meeting and look at this Facebook video that had just been posted, which is the infamous Facebook video we all know now. I basically am kept off the anchor desk, which in the beginning I understand because it's a pretty volatile situation with the riots start shortly after, et cetera. But I'm demoted. I never go on to anchor another newscast at WCCO again. And I'm pulled off of basically all of my reporting assignments, whether it's politics, public safety. I'm sidelined, and I remained sidelined for nearly 2 years.
So
before I finally left.
Was this just a guilt by association because of who you were married to? Your career path came to a screeching halt with your station. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think it was pretty clear in the beginning that the station where I worked chose to go along with the narrative, as all mainstream media did. There's no context, there's no clarity. This is all about race. And they go ahead and peddle that narrative from the beginning. I had reporters that I worked with that were using the hashtag Black Lives Matter, not knowing really anything about the organization, but really pushing this racist narrative. When there was so much more to this story, this mixed race group of officers who showed up for the call that nobody wanted to talk about. The fact that body camera video was being withheld, that's never happened before in a case. The autopsy being conducted, that's held for about a week before it was released. There was all these things sort of disappearing from the public or being withheld. And as a reporter, this is where I'm going, because this is where I think that the story is, and people need to understand this. But the media, we saw, really embrace this narrative, and we're all living the consequences, as you pointed out, Betsy, because of that.
So here you are, you have access to the facts, and you are not just a cop's wife, but you are an investigative journalist with integrity. And so you wanted to be able to talk about, or wanted somebody to talk about, the actual facts, because as we now know, although a lot of journalists still don't talk about it, a lot of media still doesn't talk about it, nor do activists, that the narrative that George Floyd was some innocent Black man murdered by Derek Chauvin, we know that not to be true. And I don't want to relitigate this case, but just talk for a couple of minutes about some of the things about the George Floyd arrest, his crime that he committed, his drug dealer that was with him, the counterfeit money, that I think, have just been really swept under the rug. George Floyd was not an innocent guy.
Yeah, we saw the police department from the very beginning, Betsy, peddle these lies. They say in the beginning they've never heard of George Floyd before. Well, in fact, in the book, we talked to the officer who arrested him nearly a year earlier in May of 2019. Why did they arrest him? Well, because he was part of an undercover drug operation, selling prescription pills, thousands of them. So we go into great detail talking to that officer. So they're lying about that. They're lying about the fact that they've never seen this MRT training. If you remember, they said, never seen it, never a part of training. We have no idea, what's happening. Well, interestingly enough, which I knew early on too, this MRT, these pages of this training manual disappear online. And as a reporter, I'm like, why are we not asking questions? These are just, they're gone. And this is a part of training. They're lying about that. And nobody's interested in that story. Just another thing that was lied about from the very beginning. And, the book, They're Lying, I feel like the title came to me very early on, because really from, I wouldn't even say day one, but almost hour one, the lies began to pile up, and there was no turning back.
So you guys, we'll talk in a minute about why you decided to write the book, but, so we have the riots going on, all of the looting, the third precinct is burned down. You and I have a mutual friend. She was texting me that night, sending me pictures saying they're burning down my precinct. We had to all get our stuff out of there. I mean, it was extraordinary. I just didn't even believe that it was real at first. And so all of this is happening. Your husband has to deal with it on his end. And then on your end, you're just kind of sat down and stopped from doing your job. But that's not all. What happened to you guys personally as a police family?
So we saw the cancel culture vultures really come after us in full force. Even though I wasn't reporting about this story, that wasn't good enough for them. I say, this group of people, they don't want you canceled, they want you killed. With their threats that they were leaving on Twitter, they were sending things to our mailbox. Our son, who was 7 at the time, couldn't even get the mail for months because it was absolutely, abhorrent what was arriving in the mail. We had a couple high-profile protests. They found out where we lived, including Black Lives Matter. Both were sponsored by Black Lives Matter. One involved 150 people where they beat Bob and I in piñata effigies in our driveway. And again, this is, something I bring up in the book about media manipulation. This is actually a state rep candidate who's beating my piñata in the driveway, and I call to the station and just say that I think this is newsworthy. The fact that this guy is doing this to a woman, I don't even care if it's me, but we should probably put this on the news. And I was told that that's showing my bias, and they were very against making Black Lives Matter look bad. They eventually did, but it took them about 3 days to put 20 seconds on the news about that protest that received national attention.
And now 2.5 years later, we know that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization, which they weren't hiding. They still don't really hide that. And they're also a financial sham. There's just no other way to say it. And they don't really do much for quote unquote Black lives. And quite frankly, they didn't do much for the Black citizens of the city of Minneapolis, did they?
No, absolutely. In fact, Candace Owens and her team from Daily Wire, they did this great documentary. They featured my story a bit, just the fact that I lost my job basically over this, and how this cancel culture works when it came to BLM, but just tracking the money. And I really applaud their team for doing that, because the media quickly moved on. Nobody from Minneapolis wanted to touch that story, and this was really a ground zero for all of it to happen. And that's what I talk about in the book, that this became, it was kind of like, Betsy, we had the perfect people in the perfect places for this to play out here. There's a lot of people that knew that more was going on, and I've heard from so many of them, and I'm grateful for all who have read the book so far. But it was like you couldn't counter this narrative, or it's career suicide in a way. So I wanted to give these officers a voice. They're trapped in the 3rd precinct. This decimated the police department. That's no secret. And I just felt it was time to put the spotlight on these stories.
So when you and Bob sat down and said, let's tell this story, let's write that book, you had left the station, right? And then where was he in his career?
So he retired. He was eligible for retirement shortly after this all happened. And we saw hundreds that were eligible, flee, and many that were not eligible leave as well. And I think that's no secret why they would, after you see, what happened here. And we have a lot of those officers talking in the book about how they were really fed to the wolves by the police administration, by political leaders. I feel like I use a lot of air quotes when I refer to these leaders, but they decided that, the entire police department and the police profession needed to be scapegoated in a way because of this. And I'm not sure whose brilliant idea it was, but I don't really think it's worked out so well.
Well, obviously we have, record level homicides for, the 3rd year in a row now. And sadly, and I just read some statistics today about who's suffering most. Young Black men are the victims of 80% of the homicides that are happening. So sad that we sacrifice the lives of these young men, frankly, for the death of a drug dealer and a counterfeiter, and again. And
I talk about that in the book, Betsy, at 38th in Chicago and Minneapolis, where this happened. There have been 9 homicides at that intersection, or right around there, since this incident. Do you think the media has put out these stories? Do people know their names? And these are all African-American victims that have been left in the wake, including a woman who was pregnant. Both her and her unborn baby died at that intersection, and nobody talks about it.
Right. And we've elevated George Floyd to this bizarre idol-like status. And I don't know how long that's going to take to go away. I've been to Ferguson, Missouri to see the Michael Brown memorial there, who has a similar status. And every year, the young man shot in Ferguson trying to disarm a police officer. And every year, politicians and activists come out with, this was the day Michael Brown was murdered. And of course, that's what happens with George Floyd. Liz, let me ask you, because you spent decades in the media, where does this go wrong with the media? When did I'll be honest, I'm 63 years old. When I was a kid, I was watching, we spent a lot of time watching the evening news. And those were people that we trusted, both the local reporters and then the national reporters. How and when did it go so wrong?
Yeah, and I think with the police narrative specifically, obviously police leaders, they encourage police body cameras. It makes sense. It's all about transparency. But now we're seeing, in a way, that these videos almost backfire because they sometimes can decide what they release publicly, withhold things that they don't want publicly released. And police work, I think, doesn't look pretty. I mean, it's just, you're meeting people and, many times their darkest moments. And we don't have, as people who take in the news, really sometimes, the background to fully understand, what's happening frame by frame. And that's where I think the police department in this instance really failed, where they could help explain things, perhaps to just offer more context. But instead, we saw this anti-police narrative, which was such a part of the left, and we're trying to oust President Trump at the time, basically at all costs. And I think that, that played a huge role in the George Floyd incident as well. But I also, just as a mainstream reporter during COVID, I was troubled by the fact that we're also privy to so much information when it came to the pandemic that we're withholding. We're getting emails from people who say that, their adverse reactions to the vaccine, or they're trying this more holistic approach to treating COVID. But we don't want to put those stories on TV. And I think these large media corporations have become more woke, more controlled by big tech. And you basically have to kind of fall in line and shut your mouth. But I became a reporter just to tell the truth, as basic as that sounds. But I don't think that's really happening on a large scale anymore. And it was very troubling for me to watch.
One of the things about the Minneapolis Police Department, and I've been in law enforcement since 1980, is they were looked to, especially from the 90s on, as one of the best trained, best educated police departments in this nation. And as the wife of a Minneapolis police officer and someone who saw, as a journalist, saw their inner workings, does it just make you sad that these cops get such a bad rap, and not just by, the media, but by their own leadership, including their mayor?
Absolutely. We've had, as you know, many progressive mayors sort of in line. And we talk about that in the book, too. This isn't just a one thing with George Floyd. We've had mayors in the past. They decided to go ahead and make this about race from the very start of things. And they don't actually have enough information to even make that call. Mayor Fry had a history of doing that long before George Floyd. So we talk about that. And these are, basically his employees, if you will, the mayor, which is why you saw so many leave in droves, because it was clear that he was fanning the flames of racism and basically serving them all up. But I think Minneapolis lost the best of the best. I mean, obviously we have very good friends who were officers, who are still officers there, but the cops that are left are almost like a fire department, if you will. They're not really much of a police department anymore. There's not a lot of proactive policing when you have half the staff you used to have, and skyrocketing crime. So it's absolutely heartbreaking what's been allowed to happen.
Absolutely. Listen, we have about 2 minutes left. So talk about what you guys are hoping to accomplish with the book, and talk about if you feel any hope for the Minneapolis Police Department and for American law enforcement and for truthful journalism. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, and I think that's why people need to care about this case, Betsy. This isn't necessarily a story of a cop's wife telling a story. It's about justice in America, and justice is not, mob justice is not justice. And that's the point I try to make. That's why people, should care and care about the truth. And really, this was just a way to set the record straight. I don't think we were really trying to do much else, but I, just felt like I'm a journalist. This is, what I'm good at. I keep notes. So I wanted to put it all together to go ahead and craft that story. The book is available on thelieexposed.com. It's on Amazon. We haven't been canceled yet, which is amazing, about a month in. So we're grateful for that. But there are more than 250 sources. We did a lot of research for this. This isn't just, my fairy tale that I crafted. These are facts, and they really should trouble anyone, I think, who reads the book.
I think the book is going to be huge. And I'm so glad that you guys were brave enough to tell your story, that you were brave enough to tell your story after being, doxxed and attacked and shoved out. You're really someone to be admired, because you didn't just throw up your hands and go, be a housewife somewhere. You said, you know what, I'm gonna right a wrong here. And I think that's why people should buy the book, read the book, and know the truth about the George Floyd case and all the behind the scenes things that you talk about in the book. Liz, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm just Liz Collin. I'm easy to find on Facebook, on Twitter, LizCollin.
Liz, thanks for spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about us, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Ma'am, put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.
Ma'am, put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.